somebody else's property, but you should have a right and be entitled to keep what you earn. That's what we need. The system is sold to the masses, and the masses believe they're going to always be taken care of, and you're going to have free education and free houses, free medical care, the whole works. And guess what? The entitlement system is built to really help the very wealthy who know how to manipulate the system. And the poor end up with the crumbs, although they were talked into accepting the entitlement system because they thought they were going to get the help necessary. But today, there is a challenge going on because they talk about the wealthy, and I already have, and criticize those who get bailed out, and the very wealthy who benefit from the destruction of money and through the inflationary system. But you don't want to throw out everybody who's wealthy. There's nothing wrong with being wealthy if you earn your money honestly. That's a big difference. The wealthy get wealthy because they deliver a service to the people. If we make an individual wealthy because they provide a good product and we vote for that product and they become wealthy, but they get no benefits, they get nothing special from the government, no bailouts, no contracts, anything, they should be entitled to keep that. But those who are in the military-industrial complex or in the financial system that benefits from the monetary system that we have, they're not entitled to that. They don't deserve the bailouts, and they should be challenged, so we have to sort out the two. If we do that, I believe we can return to a much more prosperous economy where we can have growth and jobs once again. The system is wasteful and it encourages corruption. A lot of people complain about the lobbyists having control, and they do. There's too much control by lobbyists in Washington. But the lobbyist is a consequence. They are the symptom of the problem, because lobbying is something that is encouraged by the fact that the government's running an auction. You know, H.L. Mencken said it was an auction off of stolen goods, and that's what the government does. So people have an incentive, the business people, everybody has an incentive to go to Washington because there's this redistribution of wealth and they have this incentive. Now, what we have to do is get the power out of Washington, get the money out of Washington. You won't have the incentive to go up and try to buy this power and control. But today, we have a system that has been totally undermined, and the special interests do have control of it. But another way we could solve this, if we, once again, had only those people who were dedicated to the Constitution, who weren't influenced by these special interests and couldn't be bought off, this would all come to an end as well. People ask me once in a while, well, didn't the lobbyists get to you and lobby you? And I said, well, on occasion they did, but they found out that it didn't do any good, you know. But the system of entitlements is something that has to be addressed, but the other thing that I talk about a whole lot, and the place where I want to do the first cutting, because I do want to start, you know, with a token cut in the first year of $1 trillion in 1 year. But even though our system of government in the last 40, 50, 60 years has conditioned so many to be so dependent on government, and some are tragically dependent on government. When you think of the elderly dependent on medical care and the children dependent on medical care, I don't believe that is the place where you start to cut. You don't start to cut on the food stamp program because the conditions have been created by bad government. So I want to work our way out of it. I want to have priorities. So where my priorities are to cut the big bucks are the dollars that we spend so foolishly overseas. Our national debt had an additional $4 trillion added to it just from the spending overseas. Just think if we had those strict constitutionalists that I long for in Washington, where we would to war with a declaration of war and no other way. The biggest beefs of the founders of the country and the revolutionaries against the British, that the king would go to war and then they would get taxed to pay for the wars. So we need to go to war only if there's a declaration. If there's a need to it and to defend this country, we should declare the war as we did in World War II. Go fight and win it and just come home. That's what we need to do. The difference, World War II, fighting two huge nations, Germany and Japan, in less than 4 years they were defeated. And yet here we are, we're in Afghanistan, and believe it, we're not out of Iraq yet. I'll tell you, we're in a mess, and they're looking to go into Syria and Iran. It's just constant. But we've been doing this for 10 years. And it makes no sense whatsoever, but if we'd have only gone with a declaration of war, we wouldn't have gone into these wars since, it's Korea, Vietnam, and everything since has been gone basically by the executive branch. So, if you decide that I'm going to be an executive branch, I will not go to war without a proper directive from the people and the U.S. Congress. We should not be involved in the internal affairs of other nations. And we certainly should not go to war under a UN resolution either. But there's always reasons to go to war, and sometimes the reasons they give us are not true. Some people call those lies. But certainly the conditions under which we went into Iraq, they turned out, they were not true, and many of us knew they wouldn't be true. But I'll tell you what, things are not a lot different right now. Even though the war drums are beating hard to go to Syria and go to Iran, it's very, very similar to what was happening on the preparation to go into Iraq. The Iraqi war was planned many years before. The first talk in the House floor I ever gave was in 1998, believing that there was a war coming and I was trying to head it off. But that didn't happen until after 9/11. 9/11, a terrible day in our history, but I think it's been misunderstood. I do not believe that we were attacked, nor will we be attacked because we're free and prosperous. I do not believe that is the reason. When there is a crisis, whether it's an economic crisis that requires us to bail out those in privileged positions, or when we have an international crisis like 9/11, it's used as an excuse to do the very things they've been wanting to do all along. Of course, it turned out there were no weapons of mass destruction. There was no Al-Qaeda in Iraq. Guess what? There's Al-Qaeda in Iraq today. And this whole idea that, well, we have to go wherever they are. The terrorists are everywhere. And there are Taliban everywhere. We have to kill every Taliban. But you know, the Taliban are not the Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda are radical enough and they're incensed enough that they want to come here and they do want to kill us because of the problems that we've had with our foreign policy. But Taliban are people who want to just foreigners off their land, whether they're the Soviets or whether it's the United States or the French or the British. They just want to be left alone. And if we're going to try to... Just think how fruitless that is. If they are defending their homeland and we're trying to kill them and they want to kill us because we're there, the more we go in, the more Taliban there's going to be. The more the people that, it's a catch-22. There's no ending to it. That is why the non-interventionist foreign policy of the founders makes so much sense. Let them deal with their problems. We'll deal with our problems here at home. Say, well, they write us off quickly and say, oh, you're a bunch of isolationists, you don't want to deal with the world. And you know what? It's exactly the opposite. Guess who the isolationists are? The isolationists are the ones who want to put sanctions on all these countries to punish them. And what do? They really punish them and have an overthrow government? They solidify the power and bring out their own nationalism. So when we try to punish the Iranians, we solidify the power of Ahmadinejad. It does the opposite. I don't know whether they do it on purpose or they just don't know what they're doing, but it isn't good. It doesn't work. And but sanctions is a part of the isolationism that they accuse us of. And because the founders, and what I believe is that we should be friends with as many people as we can, trade with people, and travel with people around the world. Matter of fact, I think it's about time we remove the sanctions from Cuba. Why can't we travel with Cuba? We've had sanctions on Cuba for 50 years and the Castros are still there. It didn't work very well. But I'll tell you what, the theory behind what the founders thought and what free markets describe is that when you're free, having free trade in markets, there's a self-interest involved to stay that way and not fight each other. You know, we were fighting the communists, we were fighting the Chinese, we were fighting the Vietnamese communists, and of course that war went very poorly. We lost that war. We came home. 1 million Vietnamese died, and 60,000 Americans died, but we had to come home. And they warned us. They said there would be this horrible, horrible thing. There would be a domino effect, and the communists would take over the whole world. Well, guess what? It must be free markets that moved in that direction, left our country, because now our banker's in China. So it hasn't worked all that well. But just think now, we do trade and talk to China under imperfect situations, but just think, we're not killing each other. When I was in high school, you know, we were killing each other. A teacher of mine went off to Korea and didn't come back. It made no sense to me. But what about Vietnam? Now we trade with them. We invest over there. They come over here. Imperfect. We're imperfect. They're imperfect. But just think how much more was achieved in peace, which was never achieved in all that fighting for 20 years. Atmosphere that surrounds war and various kinds of wars, whether it's the wars overseas or the atmosphere dealing with civil liberties here at home, when you have another war that goes on against the American people that causes so much trouble and so much undermining of our civil liberties, that is that onerous war on drugs that has caused so much trouble. Has been going on. The modern day war on drugs has occurred since the early 1970s. There was a more minimal war prior to that, but prior to 1912 there was no war on drugs, and a lot of people survived, you know, even in those years when they could go out and buy whatever they wanted. But the war on drugs is very, very dangerous. But the war on drugs is, matter of fact, drugs are very, very dangerous. But the war on drugs, I think, is more dangerous than the drugs themselves.